I am extremely confident that every woodworker watching this video can make every single one of the tools that we're going to make today. Not only are they simple, but they're fun little projects that will save you having to buy their expensive alternative. So let's jump into the simplest of the lot. Way back here is the rag holder that I made for my French cleat wall. Basically, it's a box with the front cut off. But we're not making that today. In fact, you don't even have to have one of these to need to make the accessory I'm going to show you. All you're actually going to need is a new standing knife blade and some 12mm or 1/2 inch ply. So raid your scrap bin and let's go. No matter what you make, we all need rags. Whether it's spillages, glue squeeze out, wiping sweat, or well, you get the point. We all do it. But one thing you don't need is a massive t-shirt every time you do it. So we're going to solve that. I started by just marking out a groove for the rag to slide down. This is where we're going to house the blade. That way, well, you can't accidentally get your fingers in there. As I need 2 identical pieces here, I'm going to stick them together with some double-sided tape and cut them together. I'm not really looking for the most stunning results, and that's why you'll notice that I don't have the jigsaw perfectly dialed in. The oscillation speed is set way too high. Admittedly, you'll get a nice quick cut, but on the other hand, you're also going to get a significant amount of tear out on the top. But remember, this is a workshop project, so I'm not particularly worried. But between me and you, it does go to show one of my biggest weaknesses within woodworking, and that's patience, or rather lack of it. I confess, I tend to rush to the finish line so that I get that dopamine hit from finishing whatever it is that I'm building. And that's one of the reasons I love doing these small workshop projects. Because you can rush, and you can get to that finished product and it doesn't have to be perfect. No one's judging you on it. So when you sandwich your Stanley blade between the 2 pieces, just at the bottom edge of the slot, make sure that it's at a slight angle, because then the rag will slide nicely along the cutting edge. And here, right now, is the first overkill of the day. You don't need to do this. I'm just making a little recess for the blade to sit in so that it's held in place tightly and won't slip. It's absolutely not necessary. Especially as I'm drilling screw holes to not only hold the 2 pieces of ply together, but also to position it in such a way that the downward pressure on the Stanley blade will actually push the blade against the screws. So now you've got your finished piece. You could just set it on a backer board, either screw it to your wall or set it on a French cleat. And it's done. Me? Well, I'm going to screw mine to the side of the rag box itself. So if you're cutting a large rag down to fill the box, or you just don't need the size that you've just pulled out of the box and you want to slice it in 2 on the cutter, well, it's right there. Now I know full well this project is not setting the world alight. And some of you are going to say that scissors or a knife will work just as well. I can't argue with that. But this was around 40 minutes of making. And on that day, that's pretty much the only time I had. And take it from me, those 40 minutes spent in the workshop on that day made a big difference to me. And that's important. Some days these, well, they're the only wins you need. So now after an easy start, we need to level it up just a little bit. I don't have 4 hands. And that's a problem. Whether you're doing pocket holes, butt joints or through-dowel joinery, holding 2 pieces of wood together and doing what you have to do can be really tricky. I've bought different contraptions over the years, but nothing works as well as I want it to. You see, you still have to hold the wood to stop it falling over, and then hold the joint tight while you wrestle whatever clamps you're going to use on. I think I can solve this. And trust me, we don't always get it right on the first try. The first thing we need is a good, accurate 45-degree rip cut. This is not easy, but it is possible on a table saw. So just take your time, make as many test cuts as you need and get it as close as you can. This could also easily be done with a track saw and possibly a little harder if you're going to use a circular saw with a straight edge, but still perfectly doable. The wood I'm using for this is just an offcut from a panel glue up. And the first thing to ensure with whatever you use is that it's got 1 square edge. And like any cut, I always make sure that the blade has no more than 3 teeth showing above the board, and then I line it up to give a crisp, sharp edge on the top. And what this leaves us with is a Toblerone shaped piece with 1 90-degree angle and 2 45-degree angles when you look at it from the end grain face. And then with your blade back at 90 degrees, if you cut the edge off again, you'll end up with a near identical piece. They don't need to be 100% the same, as long as the 45s are accurate and the cut is relatively straight. And you can test all of this out just by placing them on a flat surface back to back and checking that the joint is nice and tight. Or place them on the long side down with the sides touching and see that the angle between them at different points along the length is a perfect 90. And honestly, these will still work if you're a little bit out, so don't be too hard on yourself. Each clamp that you're planning on making will need one small triangle, roughly about 50mm in length, and then 2 equal length pieces for the opposing jaw. I've made a few different sizes just to show you the potential differences here, and, well, to experiment. A lot of what you need is going to depend on what you actually plan to clamp. The clamps I'm actually planning to adapt to these quick grip squeeze clamps. I'll put a link in the description because I think these are actually particularly good. They're inexpensive as far as clamps go, and importantly, they can be used one-handed. The vital feature that we need, however, is that when you take the pads off, there's this overhang on each of the jaws. It's having this that means we can attach to them without actually damaging the clamps. I'm placing the 2 matching triangular bars on a backer board, and then I'm just using CA glue and activator. I'm locking the first one down here using the activator, but I won't use it on the second as I don't want it to lock down instantly. I want to be able to slide it in nice and tight to ensure a really good joint between them. It's that tight joint that gives us the 90-degree angle between them. And I get to show you this really cool light test. If no light gets through, it's a 90-degree angle. Now, this next bit is a bit of a bodge, but it works. I've just cut up some 5mm ply into a number of smaller pieces, and adding these to the back is going to allow me to create a slide-on, slide-off fixing. But do be a little bit careful not to let the CA glue squeeze out onto the clamp itself. Otherwise you're going to have a permanent fixing. So long as you don't make your blocks too big, you can gradually build them up on top of each other until you overlap that overhang on the jaw of the clamp itself. And remember, tight enough so that it won't fall off, but loose enough that you can slide it off. And then the last triangle can be attached with the same system if you want, or you can do what I've done and just glue it straight onto the top jaw. CA glue's brittle, and if I want to remove it, I can knock it off pretty easily. I didn't directly glue anything to the bottom because then you can slide on and off the fixings for different sizes. That way you can adapt the clamp to different jobs you've got going on. Good tip for alignment here, just rest the top triangle in between the ones on the bottom jaw and then close the clamp on it. That way when you close the clamp, it'll always stay aligned. It's that simple. This is a really easy way of converting a clamp into a super clamp. But before we put these through their paces, I just want to take a minute to tell you about this week's sponsor. If you've watched any of my videos to date, you'll know that I've learned everything I know about woodworking from watching YouTube. But sadly, what is also blatantly obvious is that my camera skills and my editing skills are self-taught. Until now, because I found Skillshare, and they are the sponsor of this week's video. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives. All of the classes are led by industry experts across film, illustration, design, freelance, productivity, and loads more. And if you're like me, Skillshare can help you take your career, skills, hobbies, passions, or even your side hustle to the next level. Not only are there standalone classes, but there's actually what they call learning paths, which is a sequence of classes designed to take you to your goal. And I know, the videos that I make don't need to be perfectly polished, much like anything you're going to make in woodworking. But like woodworking, I want to be challenging myself to be constantly improving. So as autumn sets in and the outdoor projects become harder to do, I'm planning on diving into a few classes, starting with an introduction to lighting for videography, and then maybe following a learning path of my own that hopefully will lead me to better videos, and hopefully you'll notice it. So take a look for yourselves. The link's on the screen and in the description. And thank you to Skillshare for not only sponsoring the video, but also for allowing the first 500 people that use the link in the description to get a 1-month free trial. So if there's a skill you're looking to improve, or maybe a new one that you want to start, today's a great time to get started. And now, let's test these out. Now I've done my experiments here with longer and shorter bottom clamps. Let me show you a couple of results. Firstly, the longer clamp. And also, let me tell you some of the circumstances where you may need these, because there'll always be people telling me that I'm wasting my time. Maybe I am. So this one has the long bottom jaw, and that means it's going to clamp the boards far more stably. And I would use this one for setting up something that I may add larger, more sturdy clamps to at a later date. So in this case, it's just an extra hand, and it's not the finished clamping pressure that I need. Because its biggest weakness here is that it covers up all of the areas that you want to drive screws in through, or dowels. But I do plan to try and solve that with you live later. Well, live to the video. Not live. You'll see. If you want to leave areas exposed to screw or dowel, then the smaller clamp is the way to go. It's not so sturdy down the length of the joint, but it does leave you some good space to work. And they're far easier and quicker than my old method, which was to clamp in this aluminium square. And yes, I did give up on the screw attachments it came with. Not to mention my way uses one as opposed to that one using 2. And I know these are not going to replace all other options, but having an extra hand when you're working alone can be absolutely priceless. And now, for the live final tweaks that hopefully will take this to the next level. It's this one that I'm going to try and adjust first, because here's the problem. When you put your 2 pieces of wood in there, as we've seen, you can't actually get in there to drive a screw through or pop a dowel in, whatever you want to use as your joinery. I've got a little idea and it's either going to work or it's not, but there's only one way of knowing. So let's try a final tweak. So what I really want to do here is I want to take a chunk out of the middle of this clamp, but I want to leave the 2 outer sides. You'll see what I mean. And I think the cleanest way I'm going to do this is by actually cutting down into the 2 triangles first. I'm really hoping that a whack with a chisel is actually going to break the brittle CA glue bond without tearing out too much of the plywood. A little bit is fine. The beauty of doing it the way that we've done it is that actually both sets of these triangles now are still on the same plane because they came from the same piece of wood that was glued on. So although the upper triangle doesn't mate with the bottom one, you still know that it's on the same plane. So let's see if what we've done has actually worked. So I was going to do this live test because I was so determined that what I'd done was actually a success and you'd be able to get in there with a screw and put the 2 bits of wood together. I even got my drill out. I was going to video it on this and show you how you can get through that gap now to the joint. Well, of course you can't. Of course you can't get in there because you need to be coming through on this angle. That's still completely covered by the clamp. How did I not see that that wasn't going to work? Of course it wasn't going to work. Well, on to the next one. Stop. Don't give up straight away. I've made some more mess and I've made some more changes and I've cut out notches on either side. So before I clear up all the mess I've made, what I am going to say is this is brilliant for pocket holes. It's good as a spare hand. It's brilliant as a spare hand if you've got a small one. It's okay for 1/2 inch ply. You'll just about get a screw in there. It is great for 3/4 inch ply. Tell me what you think. Honestly, would you use this? Have you ever noticed that after you've used a card scraper for a while, it starts to hurt your thumbs? You see, for me, it's twofold. It's the heat from actually using the card scraper, but also the pressure on your thumbs from bending it to get the perfect scrapings. So I set about trying to solve this issue. And I'm not going to lie, after I got part of the way through, I wasn't going to include this as part of the video. You see, I went down a rabbit hole, completely blinkered, and it was silly. But in the end, I've decided to leave it in there because I want to show you that we all do it. So here it is, and here's my thinking. I figured that basically I needed to pad out the areas where my finger goes, using something grippy, but also insulated. But I had to also be careful not to block the areas where I run the card scraper over a diamond stone to take off the old burr, and also the area where I have to use a burnisher at an angle to create the new burr. But even with that in mind, I still figured it was possible. And as with most of my homemade tools, I decided using this nitrile impregnated cork was the best way to go. It's got quite a lot of give, it's insulated, and it's grippy. So my first attempt was to cut out some circles to put under my thumbs. That'll work, right? Well, so I glued them on, I gave it a go, and I'm going to call this a 2-scrape fail. Because that's exactly how long it took me to realise. Not comfortable at all. But I wasn't done. I opted for rectangles, something a little larger. And as I'm heading fully into the tunnel vision, I also applied flexible magnets to the back, so I can move them. 2-scrape fail. Apparently I wasn't giving up. So I roughed the magnets on some sandpaper to stop them from moving. 2-scrape fail. Only then did it dawn on me, this is not the card scraper I use. Well, not the one I use all the time. So it's no wonder it didn't feel right. What a wally. It's like driving a car with the seat in someone else's seating position. You can do it, but it doesn't feel comfortable. You see, scrapers come in different shapes and sizes, and different thicknesses. And where I thought it was the rubber that was the issue, actually, it was the scraper. This one is far thicker, has far less flex to it, and I use it to pull back on wood as opposed to push on wood. And the reason I do that is because the extra rigidity to it actually makes it better at removing more wood. Whereas I use this for more refined scraping. It's far more flexible and it's far more pleasant to use. You see, this one came in the set of 4 that I recommend, whereas this one I always recommend you buy as well, and it comes on its own. That way, you cover all your scraping bases. I'll pop some links in the description so you can check them out. Anyway, my final fix. I literally glued a long strip of rubber to the right card scraper. 5 scrapes, success. It's really easy to overthink these things. In fact, it might be my superpower. And speaking of overthinking, sticky back foam. Why didn't I think of this before? I'm gonna bet that this is the solution. The one that was hiding in plain sight. Nitrile rubber was good, but I got a feeling that this will be the cheap, simple, clean solution to all of it. Let's give it a test. Yeah. That's a 2 scrape success. That's really obviously the way forward. I don't know if I'm happy or sad about this. That was a lot of experimenting, and this was under my nose the whole time. If you find card scraping uncomfortable, get some thin, cheap, self-adhesive foam and stick it to your card scraper. Okay, with that solved, let's move on to the next one. This is actually an adaptation of a tool I made in a previous video. You see, in that video, I made myself a series of push sticks. Something for every eventuality. You see, with this one, I wanted to keep my hand as far away from the blade as possible, but while still keeping control. And honestly, this is the best one I came up with, but it's a little bit too wide for the thinner rips that you want to do. But this isn't the one I want to change. I'm going to change this one. You see, I made it so you could interchange all of the heads, just by undoing a few bolts and then sliding the head away from the handle. And then you can easily replace it with the next one. But none of these ends that I made were actually quite right. You see, for such a long reach, they all lacked sideways support. So I'm going to make some more, and you're going to see just how easy it is. Again, you just need some plywood offcuts. I'm using 18mm or 3/4 inch for each of the bases, and then 5mm or 1/4 inch for the piece that joins them to the handle. The larger of the 2 bases will have a second piece of 18mm ply sunk into a groove, and that'll give it some extra strength. And I'm going to make all of those on the table saw, but you could equally run them through a router table to make the grooves. I'm also going to cut a groove to house the 5mm ply. Now, all of these housing grooves or dados need to be snug enough, but not so snug that you can't put glue in there. And then I don't clamp them top to bottom, I actually squeeze the sides in on the piece that I'm clamping inside the groove. That way you get a really nice strong joint. And then for grip, well, it's the old favourite, nitrile cork. I'll link to it again down below, purely because it's not only great for anything that requires grip, but also line the inside of your vise with it, and then thank me later. Last time I applied the cork to these bases, I overcomplicated the process massively. This craft shop spray-on contact adhesive does a wonderful job, and it's easy. I did make one other adjustment too though. I was a little bit worried about the bolts. Not only are they a little time consuming to remove and replace, but also I don't fancy getting the cut wrong and hitting them with the blade of the table saw. So I have a few of these French cleat locks lying around, and they make it a brilliant replacement. The best part is that they don't even stick out past the base, so you won't catch them on the fence either. And importantly, the accessory swapping process is now quick and easy, so you're far more likely to actually do it. One final addition is a backstop to give you some extra push. I've glued mine and I've used a little cross lap on one of them, and that leaves me with no metal fixings anywhere on this. And having used just a dab of CA glue, I can pop it off and replace it whenever I run it inevitably through the table saw blade. So now, I've got a push paddle for every single occasion. Okay, let's finish this video off with something both simple but incredibly useful. What you're seeing now is my live very first attempt. I'm actually starting this one off as an actual prototype. This is not going to be the finished product. In making a prototype, not only will it show you if it's actually going to work, but also you can refine the making procedure for when you batch out more of these. This piece is made up of 2 parts and they're joined together using a halving joint. I think that's what it's called. Wait till you see it and then correct me in the comments if you could, please. First, the main piece. As it's the prototype, we're just going to roughly cut it out with a jigsaw. The second piece I need is also going to be 3/4 inch ply. So the bottom of the halving joint needs to be the exact width of the ply. You don't want it too tight, but equally you don't want it too loose. The second piece is also not as high as the first, so it doesn't get in the way. It's all hard to describe, but it's going to be simple once you see it. In the second, I'm cutting another notch out to mate with the first one, both the same depth. And that depth is exactly half the height of the second piece. But don't worry, if you're slightly off, you can shave the pieces down later on. Now, with the test fit working, the prototype's a success, we're actually going to make the tool itself. And this is where we've refined down our cutting process. And unlike before, I'm going to cut out the notches using a table saw with a mitre gauge and fence. So the height of the table saw blade actually dictates the depth of the notch. I like to dial this in with a piece of scrap rather than use setup blocks. I feel you get a more accurate depth. It's worth noting that with a fence and a mitre gauge like this, you're going to get a lot of tear out through the back of the piece. If you've got a sled or if you've got a sacrificial board, that's going to alleviate that problem. I make a cut, slide the board along by the curve of the blade, and then I make another, until my test bit of ply fits nice and snug. Now, if you're curious how I line up the first cut without having to take it to the blade, well, I saw this trick somewhere and I have to say it's one of the most useful things I've done to my table saw. Lay a ruler so it's touching the outside of the teeth, front and back of the blade. Draw a line from there to the front of your table saw. That line will show you on a piece which bit's going to be removed. I hope that makes sense. The fit you're looking for here is sliding in but not easily shaken out. Rest assured, I didn't get that fit on all of mine. Now here's a little tweak I made, and if you're not comfortable making this cut, just leave it off, you don't need it. I'm just making a groove along the top of all of the pieces while they're still part of the same board. I'm just going to run the board through with the blade raised to the right height, and I'm going to stop it and not remove the piece of wood until the blade has completely stopped. Then I can remove the ply. But don't do it if it doesn't feel right. Or if you don't have enough spare length of wood that you're going to get too close to the blade in this. All the notches are cut out of the second mating piece in exactly the same way. Everything's rounded off and sanded, and then we can glue them together. Alternatively, if you've got them tight enough already and you don't want to glue them together and you want to store them flat, that's absolutely fine. I've probably gone one step too far here and put non-slip pads on them, but I had them left over from another project. Now, to test. As I'm sure you've already guessed, these are little support stands for your sash clamps. You can make them for bar clamps too in a very similar way. What they do is they help you add extra clamps to the sides of a panel glue up. But more so, if you own any of these sash clamps, you're going to feel my pain here. If you don't raise them up, you can't turn the tightening arm without it bashing against your table. And that's a pain. Raise them up and they move freely. And the extra groove that I added in there, well, that's if you want to use parallel clamps, or if, like I've done here, the smaller F-style clamps for smaller panel glue ups. So they're kind of doubly versatile. Making your own tools is great. Getting the little wins when you don't have time for those big time-consuming projects can keep us all going. Really trying to get something right? Well, don't let it frustrate you, because it's still pretty useful. From the surprise solutions to the downright useful. Hopefully there's something in there that's inspired you to pick up your tools and give something a go. And if you enjoy the journey, well, the result is less important. For me, if you've got this far, I want to say thank you so much for watching. If you could hit the subscribe button and click a like, it will mean a lot. But until the next time, here's a few more to watch. I'll see you over there.